In this episode, we start writing our game. We will have a look at how to set up a game loop, draw something and animate something on the screen, and how to set up tests for it. Hi, my name is Rickard, and welcome to my channel and this new episode about Agile Game Development using Python and Pygame. In this episode, we start with a spike to learn the fundamentals of Pygame. Then we have a look at how to set up tests for it, and at the end, we will have something that looks like this with almost 100% test coverage. This episode is also available as a blog post, link in the description. Let's get started. So let's learn some Pygame. There is this example from the documentation, so let's start with that one. So I will create a spike.py file where we can experiment with Pygame. I'll just copy and paste this example and see what it does. Let's try to run it. So it appears to just draw a blank purple screen. So let's see if we can get some animation going. I think there was an example how to draw a circle here. So let's see if we can draw a circle as well. Let's see if we can get that in. So draw a circle on a screen, red. Let's just hard code something like this and see what happens. So that will draw a circle, beautiful. And let's see if we can get some animation going. So let's see if we can extract this to the position X, and let's just say position X is 50, and down here we'll also do if X is larger than say 500, then we reset it to 50, otherwise we increment it by something. I don't know, maybe 1. X is not defined. It's called PosX. Oops. There we go. We got some animation going. And I believe I want to experiment with one more thing. So from this clock tick we get back like a delta time that we can use to make animations frame rate independent. So let's see if we can do delta time there and say delta time is 0, and then we can increment it by the delta time. Let's see if that works. Goes very fast, so we can say delta time times 0.3 maybe. So yeah, now we have some basic animation going. Let's see if we can clean up this code to clarify the different parts of it. I want to separate the game logic from the Pygame setup and game loop. I extract 2 classes for the different responsibilities. I test manually that it works. We have the game, which is the logic of our game. It does things like draw circles on the screen and animates. And then we have the game loop logic, which is to set up the game loop, set the frame rate and display modes and all this stuff. And I think this might be a good separation. So let's now move to a completely different file. We'll try to do this properly with tests and see how it goes. So I have a file set up here, which will just print on hello world. And this is where we're going to implement our new app. And I also have tests set up which we can run like this. I will do that in a loop. There we go. And if I write a test like this, we'll see that it will fail. All right, so we have some basic setup here. So I find it easiest when testing to start from the outside. And in that case, it's our game. So what is our game supposed to do? Well, our game draws a circle, an animated circle on the screen, and then exits when the user closes the window. So let's see how we can express that with tests. So I'm going to use the testing without mocks pattern language for these kinds of tests, and I'll have a link in the description for them. So let's create the game class. Let's just start by writing what the game should do. So I draw an animated circle until the user closes the window. So how can we express this in a test? So let's start by instantiating a game, and we'll call game run, and let's just have it print what it does, kind of. Let's just fake this. Draw circle, exit. So game has no attribute run, so let's add that. We're not getting any output, so let's say print draw circle and then exit. Alright, so first test is passing. I flesh out some more structure, trying to evolve towards the design we had in Spike. I can do this safely because I have a test in place that ensures the correct actions are printed. Alright, so we now have something basic set up where we're kind of evolving towards the structure that we figured out in the Spike. Obviously, this is not working properly yet, but we'll continue to flesh it out. Next part I want to address is this draw circle. So I'm thinking we can do something like draw circle. And then do self.loop.draw circle, and then move that in here. So that still works. So what this means is that the draw circle draws a circle on the current frame in the loop. So it kind of makes sense to put it here in a game loop. Let's have a look at the responsibility of the game loop. Let's write some tests for that to flesh out what it's supposed to do. So one thing, let's just brainstorm what it's supposed to do. So it should init Pygame, clean up Pygame, call tick method of game, draw circles on current frame. Now I want to address those print statements. Eventually, we want to turn our game loop into an infrastructure wrapper. This is a pattern from James Shore's testing without mocks, link in the description. One part of that pattern is that we should be able to observe what game loop is doing. I make the game loop observable and replace the print statements with events. Okay, so we create a game loop. We listen for all the events that a game loop emits. We start our game and then we assert that events are happening. Alright, so let's see if we can work on any of these. So let's just do the first one and see. So I init Pygame. First one, and how are we going to test this? So the game loop is going to be annullable, and we don't want it to do anything for real in our tests. So we want to say loop is game loop create null. So create a null version, and then we'll do loop.run with some game. And we also want to say events, still track events, and then we print events and assert that we have a Pygame init event in there, something like that. I flesh out the nullable pattern of the game loop and have it actually make a call to Pygame to init it. So now we have a Pygame instance, and we can actually do what we did in the spike. So let's have a look at the spike and see. We did Pygame init, so let's actually do that here as well. But we're not going to use the global Pygame, we're going to use the Pygame that we passed in. So now it's saying that null Pygame has no attribute in it. So let's just add that and do nothing. And at the end, we also did Pygame quit, so let's add that one as well. And it doesn't have a quit, so let's add it. There we go. And we haven't actually tested that this works for real. So what I mean by that is we haven't done a test like game loop dot create dot run null game. We haven't done that. So let's see. And this will be hard to test automatically because it will show something on the screen and wait for user input, and I'm not really sure how to actually test that. So my plan here is to do that manually. But let's see how this works when we run it in our test suite. So first of all, we don't have the create. So let's add that. Create should do return game loop and pass the real Pygame. And Pygame is not defined, so let's import it. That actually worked, all right. So right now we're not showing anything on the screen, but we're actually, so this will probably work. We can do Pygame init and we'll not show anything on screen. Do game tick. Right. So now let's see if we can run this for real. I suspect it doesn't work anymore. Right. So here we need to do game. We need to pass in a game loop. We can do game loop.create and then we can run the game. So it will start Pygame, init it, do a tick in our game, which draws a circle. All right. What does draw circle do? Nothing. And then it will exit. I continue to flesh out the infrastructure wrapper to also create a screen and draw a circle on it. Okay, so let's try it now for real. I'm not sure if that showed up on the video, but there was actually a red circle drawn on the screen. I'll try it one more time. But the problem is that we're not having a loop yet. We're just drawing one thing and then exiting. Let's see how the tests read. So for the game test, we have I draw an animated circle until the user closes the window. So we have the init, we draw a circle, Pygame quit. But there's nothing in the tests here indicating that the user should close. So there's no concept of a loop and events yet. I add the ability to simulate events and implement actual looping. So let's try it out for real. Now we're actually getting the circle drawn on the screen, and when we close the window, it exits. Time to get an animation going. I add the logic for the delta time, then modify the draw circle to increment the x coordinate. And that works. Let's see, now we should have an actual animation. But we're not clearing the screen. I add the logic to clear the background. Alright, let's see what it looks like now. Much better. So the final thing I want to do is to loop this back over the animation. So how do I want to test that? Do I want to test that? So let's just add it for now without tests. So if self.x large. Testing the animation through the top level method is actually a bit tedious. I imagine that the animation code will eventually move into a lower level class, which is easier to test. And animation just serves as a placeholder now for the actual game. That's why I'm fine just adding the animation reset code without tests. At this point, I believe our test-driven implementation does exactly the same thing as the spike does. One final thing I want to do before we finish this episode is refactoring the exit logic. So right now the game loop is quit when we return true from the tick event, from the tick function. And that's a bit unclear to me. So instead what I want to try is that the tick function raises an exception. So we shouldn't need to change any tests for this, just pure refactoring, doing something in a different way. So let's see, first I want to introduce the exceptions. So let's say exit game loop. Let's have it be a exception. And then in the game loop, let's do try, and then accept exit game loop, and just don't do anything. That works. So let's try to, instead of return true, let's instead raise game loop exit. See if that works. No, something failed. Okay. Init. We're not raise. Whoops. Not raising game loop. Or game loop. Was it exit game loop? There we go. Still works. Let's do the same here. All right. So now, do we have more return true? Nope. So now we should be able to remove this running variable from the game loop and just say while true. Should all work. We don't need to set this variable. We don't need this if statement, and we don't need this variable. I will almost certainly guarantee you that this will actually work for real. There we go, animation is still going, and we can exit. This is where testing really pays off. I wanted to change the game loop, like the exit logic. And sure, it wasn't a big change. I could have tested this manually, but now I get really fast feedback that this thing was working because I had all the tests. And even though we can't assert like stuff is actually drawn on screen. This is we have enough test coverage to do certain refactorings and be confident that they will still work. We now have a great base to build our game upon. I'll see you in the next episode.